Hello, this is Ron Zook, the host this evening for this occasion of Aware on the Air. Aware is the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local group with no affiliation to any other larger or national group. And we hope to bring you some provocative thoughts about war and peace and matters of racism and social conflict generally. So we ordinarily have several sections, portions of this show. One I call Villains, Madmen, and Demons, in which we identify the bad people, supposedly, who are causing all of our troubles. And the American theory, of course, is that we name those people and then take them out, and that will solve our problems. So we talk a bit about the causes and consequences of past, present, and future wars. And the one I seem to keep returning to is the USA rearming and acquiring ever more nuclear weapons. And there's an enormous wave of propaganda coming at us recently. The one I see ordinarily is PBS, the Public Broadcasting System, but we're getting a lot of it from other places too. So perhaps we'll return to that and have a few things to say about it. The U.S. has far more and bigger and better killing machines than anyone else, any other country in the world, by orders of magnitude. But some presidential candidates are claiming that our armaments are dangerously depleted and in need of enhancement so we can make America great again. They seem to have in mind throwing more and more billions upon billions of dollars at the Pentagon while denouncing spending on human needs of the population for education and medical services, and of course demanding a balanced budget. So we'll go through this piece by piece perhaps, but let's start the conversation with Michael. What do you have today?
News about the refugee crisis. Austria has limited asylum to 1% of its population, and thus caused a block of a number of immigrants using the path from Southeast Europe to cross over to Western Europe. The Greece ambassador has recalled to Austria amid growing tensions between the two countries over Vienna's strong arm approach to handling of Europe's migrant crisis. Enraged at its exclusion from a mini-summit of Balkan states convened by Austria on Wednesday, Athens hit back, denouncing what it described as diplomacy that had roots in the 19th century. At the meeting, nations along the migrant route agreed to step up restrictions, including closing borders to stem the number of immigrants flowing into Europe, effectively stranding thousands in Greece. That's one news about the...
Have you seen the videos of what's happening, especially at the border between Greece and Macedonia?
Yes.
It's pathetic. They're using tear gas to keep these migrants out, and it's turned into a really pathetic example of use of these crowd control weapons on ordinary innocent people who are trying to reach some point of safety, and it's absolutely hair-raising. But anyway, go ahead, Mike.
Macedonia has restricted only Iraqi and Syrians to allow to cross their border, and closed the border for Afghan people who at the same time have a war going on in their country. So it somehow seems hardly understandable why only Iraqis and Syrians should be allowed to pass, and suddenly Afghan people would be, after they've done the walk from the Middle East through a number of countries invested thousands of dollars, which is an incredible sum for these people, should be stranded in a country and not being let through again. So that's where these tensions come, where part of these tensions, I mean, what explains the rage of the people.
Yeah. Well, these countries in that area can't be expected to absorb, thousands, potentially millions of people endlessly. And so I understand why they think there has to be some control, some barriers. But at the same time, to see these people pushed back as they're trying to reach some safe place is really very saddening. But in any case, go ahead, Michael.
President Obama has announced plans to close the Guantanamo prison. In the Guantanamo prison, currently there are about 700 people detained, out of which the majority is of Islam origin. In numbers published by the International Security Database, the terrorist attacks of jihadists compared to far right-wing attacks in the US show that we have had 48 people being killed by far right-wing terrorist attacks compared to 45 of jihadist attacks. It's hardly understandable why in a prison that uses torture to interrogate people about their planned terrorist attacks, only jihadist people are interrogated, while we step away from far-wing right-wing people and leave them completely out of the interrogation process. In a student movement to revolt against the cuts of higher education funding, 20 students have stepped up 1 week ago at the Illinois Capitol to lobby for higher education funding, for the student access bill, and for the bill providing MEP grant funding to undocumented students in Illinois. The MEP grant bill has been vetoed by Senator Rauner last week. However, the student access bill was passed by the Illinois Student Senate last week after a 2-hour discussion and fighting process with Illinois Republicans.
How do you follow what's going on in Germany? Michael's from Germany. How are they reacting? And is there any blowback from this refugee situation concerning Merkel and what's happening in German politics? What do you think about that?
So there is a tremendous blowback inside Germany, especially party-wise from Merkel's own party. However, there have also emerged 2 other smaller minority parties, the Alternative für Deutschland and another more far right-wing party, which according to current polls will make their way into a number of parliaments inside Germany. People-wise, there has emerged a majority of people who reject the continuous taking in of immigrants, partially due to a hysteria that we've discussed in the past one time in the past weeks as a result of the Cologne. The storming of clubs and
the attacks there.
Is that by Pegida?
In the New Year's Eve night. There's the fear that immigrants might sexually assault German women. On the other hand, far right-wing people actively stand up against immigrants, not only resulting in revolts, blocking the incoming refugee buses, but also in attacking and innocent immigrants inside Germany who are not at all related to any criminal activity.
Could I mention something
Sure.
related to Germany? And yeah, NATO operations in the Aegean heightens the threat of war with Russia. Now, this is an article that I just got yesterday, written by Johann Stern. He says that a NATO convoy under German leadership is to begin operations in the Aegean Sea in the next few days. NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg and German Defense Minister Lehmann said Thursday. The official goal of the mission is the complete closure of the Aegean to refugees, militarily strengthening Fortress Europe against refugees from the war zones in the Middle East. The dispatch of warships to the strategic Aegean Sea also heightens the risk of NATO intervention in the Syrian civil war and war with Russia. Now, he goes on to say, Stoltenberg goes on to say that ships will provide information for the Greek and Turkish Coast Guard and other national authorities, allowing them to act even more effectively against illegal trafficking networks. We will also establish direct connections in European Frontex so that it can do its job more effectively. But the author here makes it very clear that what they see is the NATO mission being in the Aegean not only entails increased support for Turkey's war drive against the Kurds and the Syrian government, but is a direct part of the NATO war preparations against Russia. And I don't want to go into all this detail here, and since I just read it. In its latest edition, Newsweekly Der Spiegel describes the consequences, including those unintended, of the NATO mission. It says of the growing risk of war between Russia and Turkey, it is the year in which the world stands as close to a nuclear war as never before in the history of the Cold War. Provocations, red lines which are crossed, airspace violations, a shot-down aircraft, a missile fired in error, or a submarine commander loses his nerve can trigger a world war. So some of what I'm reading and getting is that actually, I've heard that Europe can take in millions of refugees, okay? But the fact that it's being pushed in as rapidly and in such large quantities at this moment, that some of it, I mean, it's actually a program to cause chaos and to create this. And maybe, Ron, maybe you can point out the Aegean Sea. I think that's kind of important.
Oh, well, it
Where-
goes up the side of Greece over here. There is Turkey, there's Greece, and there's
Right.
the Aegean right between the two. The spot in the news has typically been the 5-mile gap between Asia, the old name for Turkey, and the Greek island of Lesbos, which is right up in here.
Okay. Now, it doesn't look, when I just look at the map, I'm thinking, well, it doesn't look like it's a threat to Russia.
Yeah, right.
But evidently it's because it's NATO, and it's placing more NATO presence throughout that whole area.
Yeah.
that's-
And yeah, the Russians have been very clear for a long time that they won't allow hostile forces right on their border. They demand that it be neutral.
Well,
And,
gee, isn't
right.
that rather
Yeah.
selfish of them?
And I mean, we saw what happened when the Russians were accused of putting missiles on Cuba 90 miles away.
Exactly.
And that almost brought on a world war. But
Well,
apparently it was due
yeah.
to one Soviet
Missile.
submarine officer
Right.
who disobeyed orders and said, "We don't fire." And
right. And that,
you might say that the world was saved by this
yeah,
guy.
yeah. Oh, that's what Der Spiegel's point is that what if you have an officer who is less apt to disobey orders? You know, anything could happen. So, yeah. So anyway, that's
Yeah. Well, the parallels here are ominous. Didn't we have someone in Germany in the late 20s and early 30s saying, in effect, make Germany great again? Deutschland über alles. Über alles in der Welt. And yeah.
well. I
Well,
just
we-
heard Hillary Clinton saying that we don't have to make America great again. We've always been great. We just have to, and then she goes on with something else, and I was rather turned off.
Yeah.
The minute you start hearing people saying
So
how great we are.
that is a really vicious idea, this
Yeah.
greatness. Spell out what that's supposed to mean. Was Rome great? Well, they were, by any reasonable definition, they were the greatest power in the world in their day, but they too deteriorated and declined and fell. And what does this greatness consist in? So
Well, can
an
I?
old-fashioned historical argument was Greece or Rome greater?
Yeah. Well,
Greece had the culture, which is still with us,
Right.
and very much determines what we think about and say and so on. Rome had more military power, but made very little contribution to our culture today in the 21st century. But Michael?
Yeah, I would agree with that. We have a candidate proclaiming our "Make America Great Again,"
Yeah, right.
probably.
Yeah.
And he's also proclaiming building a wall, which was built
Right.
in Germany in the
Right.
in the 40s. Some similarities between these candidates seem to emerge.
Certain fascist tendencies, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I
And
wouldn't
I'm
be-
not the only one to say that either,
Right.
by the way.
I wouldn't be too glib about the parallels, but certainly there are things there that I view as kind of ominous. And after the humiliation of losing World War I and the hyperinflation in the 20s under the Weimar Republic and so on, there were a lot of people who were eager for that message of make Germany great again and to take its place among the nations and so on. And that made them very vulnerable to the kind of demagogue who came along at that time and promised them that that's what would happen. And we all know what it led to. But anyway, Karen, do you have something else for us?
Well, yeah, a couple things. Well, first I want to mention that I did read something chilling briefly this morning about our military buildup in the, well, I have a whole article here, our continued military buildup as well as our provocations in the South China Sea. But this morning, the focus was really on North Korea. Even though we know that, I mean, they really are going to now try to contain North Korea, which we know is really meant to contain China and is likely to result in war. So here again, more war provocations. I won't go into detail about that. I wanted to discuss, actually I wanted to talk about Libya for a minute.
Sure.
Last week was the 5-year anniversary of the destruction of Libya, the slaughter of Gaddafi. And I thought, I started reading into it, and I remembered back in the 80s visiting the US and seeing Saturday Night Live making fun of Gaddafi, and I didn't know who he was. I didn't know anything about Libya or Africa or what was going on there. But since then, of course, I know that he was killed. We've all seen the Facebook pictures of Hillary Clinton mockingly, after she saw him being slaughtered, saying that, well, we came, what was the saying that she said, and then he died or something like that, and laughing hysterically.
Yeah.
But here are the things, and my question is, well, why? Why did we destroy Libya? We always hear about, well, human rights abuses, he was a dictator and all of that, and I keep thinking, well, then why were we friends with him? Yes, we did bomb sometime in the 80s to try to kill him, and we killed his adopted child. But I've never understood what we had against him. Well, this is what I came up with. In 1969, one of his first actions was to expel the UK and US military bases, okay, from Libya. His government also committed the very grave sin of nationalizing the oil resources and sharing their profits with its people, providing clean drinking water and adequate housing, also engaging in large-scale infrastructure projects, and providing legal protections for a lot of the migrant workers that were there. Now, he didn't just accelerate African unity, he bankrolled it. His goal was for Africa to be a bloc, unified, rather than just made up of many nations, which, as we know, that's how the Western powers then deal with each nation, whether it's making loans to indebt them or to go in militarily and own them, setting up proxy governments and dictators. So his goal, along with Nelson Mandela, who also supported this goal, was to unify Africa. Now, a lot of the business, now Eric Dracer has said frequently that the real concern was the competition from China, because China was the one that was coming in with a lot of business investments and building up the Libyan infrastructure. And I've discussed that in the past, the way China does business in Africa as opposed to the way the U.S. does. And even though the U.S., we may have canceled a lot of the Western loans or the debts that Africa incurred due to us, China will still go in and make interest-free loans, and then they will make their profits from the businesses that are done. And it's hard for us to compete with that, because we demand that the governments do what we want them to do. We give them money to militarize, and then we demand that they follow our thinking.
Yeah.
And I have a full article that would take us a long time that I won't go into, but it's all about Africa, our military bases with AFRICOM set up all over Africa. But back to Gaddafi in Libya, is that he made the mistake also of canceling a deal with Bechtel. Bechtel's a major contractor, and they're the #1 contractor in the U.S. worldwide, okay, for building infrastructure projects, primarily power and oil and even nuclear power, etc. So the energy, they build refining, I mean, they're involved in all of that. They're a major competitor of KBR, but they're the #1. KBR is the construction arm of Halliburton. Okay, so he canceled that. He also canceled a major arms deal with France, which totally infuriated Sarkozy at the time. Now, and he planned on selling oil for gold dinars, I think that's the pronunciation, instead of US dollars. Now, most of what I see online is that, well, when he did that, that was it. But it wasn't, and it almost never is just one thing. It's usually many, many things that, that cause the US to go in through NATO, through AFRICOM, okay, to bring down his government and to create a failed state. But it's really not that Libya failed, because they were actually doing quite well. They were probably the most prosperous and thriving nation within Africa, or at least certainly within the Sahel. But his real downfall, as somebody told me recently, was that he also chose not to become a nuclear power, not to become a nuclear nation, okay, nuclear-armed nation, which leads one to realize that, I mean, there's a reason why a nation would want to be nuclear armed, because that may be the only thing to propel us from taking over. Anyway, in going through all of this, I was just so disturbed over what's happened, and now the U.S., we're going back in to Libya, almost like vultures, because what's happened is that the infrastructure has been destroyed, he was slaughtered. You have the various different groups, tribal groups, fighting for power. And so now we'll just go in and sort of pick them off and pick and choose who we want to lead. And
But it hasn't turned out that way.
not yet.
Yeah,
But we haven't
Libya
really.
is a total mess.
Well, yes, that's what I'm saying. It's a total mess, and now we're going to go back in. That's our plan.
Yeah.
Well, we know that the UK has been training and flying over, and we know that the UK, we ourselves may not go in, but we will certainly use our proxies, and the UK is #1. But I think the plan is that we will also go in.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And the United Nations report about the Libyan topic has revealed that all sides are guilty of war crimes, torture, sexual rape, and
Oh,
others.
well, that's war, yeah.
Yeah, that's
war.
a typical
That-
finding, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I hear women, I've heard recently about women saying about, oh, we have to vote for this one, we have to vote for that one, rape. I keep thinking, wait a minute, where do you think the greatest number of rape takes place? During war.
Yes,
So if you're a woman and you have a thing about war, believe me, or about rape, you don't want to ever see war, because that's where the slaughter or child abuse. That is the greatest
Yeah.
use of child abuse. I mean, the killing, it's not just men soldiers out there being killed. Civilians are being slaughtered. We've been doing that with our drones. So to me, the prevention of war is almost the most #1 humanitarian goal worth working towards.
Yeah, Chris Hedges' book, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning, is very eloquent on this.
Oh, he's always eloquent, yeah. Yeah, I read
that,
that.
why do we love war so much? We always say that, of course,
Mm-hmm.
we hate it, we don't want it, and so on, but our behavior doesn't accord with that.
What is
and,
the, I'm sorry.
It's his book of about 10 or 12 years ago called War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning.
Okay.
And the attraction of it, well, it's like a drug, he says.
Must be.
You may hate it and want to get rid of it and so on at one level, but at another level, people enjoy it and keep going back to it because it gives meaning to a lot of otherwise pointless, meaningless lives of people. We must win the war. Don't you know there's a war on? And so
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
And another attraction of it is that all of the ordinary rules and inhibitions of civilized life disappear during a war. So there's an enormous proliferation
yeah.
of rape, murder, pornography, and everything that people say that they don't like and don't want. All of those old rules just disappear, and the murder, rape, despoliation can go on virtually without any rules, inhibitions, whatever.
Right.
And that makes it very attractive to some people, and
Well-
to other people who would never admit that there's anything like that in their motivation for welcoming war.
Well,
But-
we were also, some of us, I mean, we were raised to believe in the glories of war,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
And I've often said that as a 12-year-old or something watching the old movies on the Playhouse Theater at 1 in the afternoon during the summers, that Bataan was one of my favorite, The Fall of Bataan, with Robert Taylor going down in a hail of bullets as a hero and being really moved by that. To me, he was doing something so heroic. So I remember thinking in terms of people going to war, I got it. I really thought that was an heroic thing to do, fighting for your country. And then I read The Red Badge of Courage about the Southern War, written by Stephen Crane. And this is why I keep pointing out to people, books are so important, because only a book can take you inside the mind of individuals and see what unfolds before them and the descriptions that are portrayed. And of course, I read a lot of Hemingway and Leon Uris and the bombing of Dresden. I mean, when you read and understand what war really entails, and of course the Vietnam War, I know the details of that, you can't possibly support something that is so horrific.
Yeah. Well, even Dwight Eisenhower, who's been looking better and better in the perspective
Yes.
of history in
Yes.
some respects,
Yes.
he was not terribly bright or learned, but he had seen war up close, and he knew what it was like. And his statement was that anyone who's known war can't be in favor of it. It's the people who have seen the least of it who are the most enthusiastic for war.
Well, I think the most effective anti-war protesters are the veterans
Yes.
when they come back.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Michael?
certainly they have a pretty strong voice. At the same time, Italy facilitates U.S. military intervention through providing the U.S. military with an air base on Sicily to fly more drone attacks to the North African and Libyan area.
Yeah. Well, there's long been a American missile base in far eastern Turkey. I'm not sure that's still active, but right on the border of the Soviet Union, and people keep asking, well, why should they object to that? Because we're just defending ourselves with these anti-aircraft missiles and so on.
That's the word they use here. We're just defending ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, we always say that. That's our
cliche,
usual
yeah, we're always
excuse.
defending ourselves.
Yeah.
That's what the policemen say when they
Yeah.
gun down civilians and so on.
Well, we're always going in for humanitarian reasons.
Right, right,
It's like,
yeah.
if it's humanitarian, send in food, send in medicine, send in doctors, you know?
Well, there's always a cover story, of course,
Right.
about how idealistic we are. We are
Yeah.
defending ourselves. We are promoting freedom, democracy, and human rights.
Yeah. it's
And
really-
Whether or not the defended ones want
yeah,
it.
right, right, right. So, yeah, we've touched on an important theme here, I think, that we seem to, or at least, well, not all of us, of course, but the Pentagon at least, and sometimes the State Department also seems to need an endless series of supervillains to defend us against. So we, one by one, we picked them off. Osama bin Laden, Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi in Libya. This is the mystique of regime change, and yet nothing ever really changes as we kill these guys off one by one. So the same kind of propaganda is being used against Putin now. Putin is corrupt, and he wants to conquer Europe and recreate the old Soviet empire and so on. And it's amazing how little basis in reality there is for any of this. So yeah, again, the American theory is that our troubles are caused by evil, rotten people who are plotting against us. And our job is to identify those people and to take them out. And that will presumably solve our problem. But again, it never does. And they always seem to get worse after we've done the elimination of those super baddies. So why is that? Why can't we learn from this?
Well, it's
That-
not about learning because we don't, you know, that's where I think you and I would disagree. I don't think any of this was a mistake. I don't think it's about learning from our mistakes. Anything that we learn, our government, who's owned by the corporations, anything that they learn is simply going to be, let's try a new strategy. And we know that there's such a thing as soft power. We know that they also use money, and that's part of what's in some of the articles I have here. Money and finance to control nations. But at the end of the day, it's all about the military. I want to take us back to General Wesley Clark's statement that when he spoke with, not even sure who it was he spoke with at the time, but he came out on Democracy Now! And said that this was before we had war with Iraq. And he was questioning why Iraq. It had nothing to do with 9/11. And he was told that it's even worse. We're not only going to have war with Iraq, we're going to go into Syria, Lebanon, Libya. They were already in Afghanistan, Somalia, Iran, and Sudan. That's 7 countries in 5 years. Now, we didn't quite make our goal. What we also need to know is that we did, when we destroyed Libya, we destabilized Mali. Mali and Somalia. I guess Ethiopia was able to go in and create chaos in Somalia in 2006, I think it was. Yes, the U.S. backed an invasion by Somalia, or of Somalia by Ethiopia in late 2006, with CIA funneling money and weapons, whatever. I won't to Washington's favorite warlords. So it's almost as if. And as I said, when you read Brzezinski's The Grand Chessboard, it doesn't pull any punches, what our goals are, but destroying the whole Maghreb, and here they refer to it as the Sahel. And I've seen the maps that they show, the whole Sahel area.
It's this tri-area down here, below the Sahara, right across here in Africa.
Okay. That whole area where we've got, you know, AFRICOM set up throughout. I think Zimbabwe is one nation we don't have, along with Eritrea. And China is very involved doing business deals with Zimbabwe, et cetera, et cetera. I haven't come across anything there regarding our goals for Zimbabwe or Eritrea, but it's quite clear that we're not finished. But the fact that we're taking on Russia and China now at this time, at the same time. I mean, when I say taking them on, I mean, people would say, oh, well, they don't really want, we just want to control them. But it is very provocative, and accidents happen, and we're talking about NATO on the borders of these nations, and we're talking about nuclear-armed nations. So,
Here's a piece that surprised me a little that appeared in the local daily. Russian PM, NATO rekindling Cold War. So the alliance says its military moves are a response to Russia's aggression, but Russia's prime minister accused NATO on Saturday of restarting the Cold War amid increased military maneuvers and troop deployments to countries neighboring Russia. Moves that the alliance's top official defended as a necessary response to aggression from Moscow. So this was published locally on February 14th, Valentine's Day. And that's the line of justification that's being used, is that Putin is becoming so aggressive, and we are just resisting this expansion.
yeah, and what,
of Russia.
nations is Putin invading right now?
Yeah, right.
Given the 7 that we,
Well, the ones that are always brought
We
up
have already
are Georgia, the country, and Ukraine, Crimea. And
but they're part
they were parts
right
of
next door, yes, and they
Russia
were parts of
and
Russia.
the Soviet Union.
A lot of
and so
Russian
on.
citizens,
And
yes.
there's an enormous historical, geopolitical, ethnic,
Right.
linguistic case to be made for those countries being part of Russia, or at least dependencies of Russia. But we can't admit that.
No, I mean, the same case can be made for China when they invaded Vietnam in 1979. Now, remember, people, I just said 1979.
Yeah.
They haven't done anything since then. People talk about their, and of course, Tibet, but again, there's history there. And that goes back to what, 1954, I think? I don't know. Or their occupation of Xinjiang, which is sort of Turkish and Chinese.
Yeah.
I mean, but here again, they're border nations. They have never intruded beyond that.
Yeah.
Even as far as I know, I don't think China ever even invaded Japan. Even though Japan constantly invaded for centuries, Japan was invading.
Well, there was a
strong
Sino-Japanese
Persians.
war, but I don't remember the details.
I'm
Yeah,
not
the
sure either, but the
question of-
Japanese were always invading China.
Right. Yeah. And the question of Tibet is a very complicated and tortured
Exactly.
one. Tibet has been part of China and not a part of China off and on for centuries.
Centuries,
Yeah.
exactly.
And so it's a very unclear kind of case. But yeah, so I was just pointing to the usual cover story that Russia is being aggressive, and we have to stand up to those Ruskies and
But that's my point too, is that, Ron, is that we hear about how awful Russia is for invading Crimea, taking over. We hear about China and Tibet. But what we have to recognize is that these were nations that were part of
Yeah.
them, and they're on their borders, but they don't have, neither nation has a history. Well, we won't talk about the Soviet Union in Eastern Europe, but under current governments, they're not going in and invading, say, Canada or Mexico or Australia or New Zealand.
Right.
And we're invading nations. I mean, even our Pentagon, even Ash Carter making the statement recently that we're a presence in the South Pacific, or the Southeast, sorry, the South China Sea,
Right.
and we're going to stay there. He said, we're a Pacific power, and we are there to stay. That's it.
yeah.
And if you, again, you look at the map, it's kind of like, well, really? I mean, doesn't China have more of a claim on that area? And
Yeah.
that's also another case where we are using the divide and conquer that we would have liked to have used in Africa, and we still are, is that we use with our Southeast Asian, China Southeast Asian neighbors, and building them up, giving them millions to build up their military against China. And yet I do think that these nations, from the last meeting here at Sunny Lands, California, nothing really came out of that. So I think they recognize that, sure, we'll take your money, but
Yeah.
we'll build up our military, but taking on China may be more than they care to do.
Yeah, this has many aspects. Where did the Middle Eastern quagmire that we are bogged down in now really come from? There was this mystique of regime change, and we keep wanting to knock off these supposed dictators with no thought, apparently, to what's going to
Yeah.
follow. And we've seen what it's led to, again, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and Libya. And are we creating the same kind of situation in other places,
Yes.
Eastern Europe, where we're arming them very heavily now? The Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and so on. A lot of armaments are being poured into those countries. One consequence of all of this agitation there has been began to uncover the anti-Semitic and pro-Nazi occupations of a whole lot of people in the Baltic states that were kept apparently quiet for decades. But all of that is emerging now, and it's long been a basis for a lot of social conflict and accusations and so on in Poland and in the Baltic states of having been soft on the Nazis and then soft on the communists and so on. And a lot of that they would like to keep hidden, but it's long been there as a kind of undercurrent. And can we ever really get rid of these ancient hatreds and accusations and so on? There's a resurgence of right-wing, some would say quasi-fascist thought in a good many places now, in France and Germany and another number of other European countries. Some are even seeing it emerging in India with the BJP party, extreme nationalists, and attempts to suppress the political activities and communication of the more left-wing parties in India. And I find this very ominous. But it's not as if this is a really completely new thing. The only really surprising recent development has been the open embrace of Nazism in Western Ukraine. The city of Lvov, which is about 20 or 30 miles from the Polish border, is the only place in the world now, as far as I know, where the Nazi swastika is being openly paraded in the streets. And I find that kind of chilling. But have you heard about this, Michael?
I'm just reading about it.
Yeah.
Where?
On Global Research.
In Western Ukraine, near the Polish border, the city of Lvov, which is
Oh, right, okay.
yeah, which is the next largest city after Kiev itself.
So the Global Research writes, the US has installed a neo-Nazi government in Ukraine. Flowering democracy revolution. The grim realities are otherwise. What is at stake is a US, EU, NATO-sponsored coup d'etat in a blatant violation of international law.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that story still needs to be told, I think. Eventually it may come out. The American contribution, the CIA, the neocons, and so on, to the supposed uprising in Kiev and what they've done to Ukraine. And there's still a lot of trouble there. The oligarchs are generally acknowledged by almost everyone to be so totally corrupt and incompetent that they can't hold Ukraine together. But we're still pouring more and more money into it and trying to save this poor, beleaguered country, which is a victim of Russian expansionism and so on, which is a surprisingly, apparently, persuasive bit of propaganda against Putin and supposed Russian aggression. But there we go, once again.
Well, our vilification of Putin is just right up there with our vilification of Gaddafi, of Assad, Saddam Hussein. I mean, you know, we want, and I mean, are we still, have we backed off from saying, well, Syria, you know, we need regime change?
Yeah.
I mean, no, we haven't. We still one of our goals, so.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's being, we're being warned about concerning Hillary, is that the story I'm getting is that Obama was very reluctant to go in and attempt regime change in Libya. But Hillary was all for it, and she finally, apparently, convinced Obama to go ahead with it. And
I think that's a bit simplistic.
well, yeah, everything I say and you say will always be simplistic.
No, what I mean though is people will like to label Hillary. I think it's simplistic when we label one person as
Yes.
the evil incarnate. We know that there are a lot of people that
Yeah.
make up advisors to the
Yeah.
White House. She's only one of them.
Well,
but
isn't-
you're right,
yeah.
you're right. She was all for it, there's no question.
Yeah.
And that to me is enough reason not to ever want her sitting in that chair in the White House.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, yeah. Has she changed in any respect, or can we expect her, if she
No.
becomes president, which seems more and more likely, to be less aggressive?
I think
I
what
don't
I've
see it,
been
but-
reading and my impression is that she's not an ideologue, she is very pragmatic.
Yeah.
And she is what I would use the term opportunist.
Right.
And that means pleasing those in power. And so there's no reluctance on her part to stop, as I said, what is laid out in the grand chessboard, which means total control, even if it means going to war with Russia and China.
Every time someone mentions that, I can't imagine that. Going to war with Russia, do you understand what that would entail?
I know. Ron, I feel the same way. And I keep thinking, oh, come on. These people are not stupid. These are Carl has pointed out, these are people, you know, we knew in school. I didn't, but that are very bright. They're what are they thinking? Are they thinking that Russia and China will simply say, well, okay, we've got the common sense here. We're much more sensible, so we'll back down. But like they say, accidents happen. Anything can happen. And my thinking is that you keep hemming someone in, meaning containing someone. And China, I mean, at some point, they're never going to allow themselves to be controlled the way they were in the past.
Yeah.
Their memory goes way back, and that's never going to happen again. So.
Current estimations predict that if Hillary were to run against Donald Trump, Trump would actually go make the race.
But you know what, I know, and you know what bothers me though, is I know Carl often tries to point out, and some people think, yeah, and Trump has said it was a mistake that we went into Iraq, and we shouldn't be over there, we shouldn't be it makes him sound like his foreign policy is so much better than Hillary's. Therefore, all you lefties, you should get behind Donald Trump because he will not be as apt to go to war as Hillary. And I'm like, give me a break,
Yeah.
come on. And the people that are supporting him are not the people they're not supporting him because of his anti-war policies, okay? They are supporting him because he wants to build walls, because he blames immigrants. To me, he is, I don't know what better term, he's certainly a bully, we know that, and he plays that up really well. Daniel Welsh was just speaking this morning, he said initially, I thought that he was just out there to distract everyone, you know, to make Hillary, the other side, look really good. Well, frankly, that's what I've been thinking all along. But now Welsh is saying, but you know, now I'm beginning to wonder. But he said, at the end of the day, this is a guy who has changed things that he said. One minute he says he's opposed to waterboarding. The next minute he's like, yes, of course we'll use waterboarding if we have to. I mean, so he is the worst kind of a dictator in that he picks on the little people. And this is what I've said. When you blame the little people for your problems, meaning the immigrants, the poor, the impoverished, these are the people that he's blaming. Sure,
The
he'll say
losers.
something. He'll say something about Wall Street and the banksters, but at the end of the day, he's one of them.
Yes.
So who's bankrolling him? So come on, people. If you're opposed to war, as I hope you are, don't get on the bandwagon of Trump. And if you're someone who thinks that we have to have a woman in the White House, then Jill Stein with the Green Party. And I know there's a lot out there saying that a third party can never win, but we have to start sometime. We have to start building it. Michael, maybe you can talk a little bit about our program tomorrow.
Yeah, sure. Firstly, about Trump again. So he's. I wouldn't say that what he says is like generally what he means. He's very versed in using the media and the system and getting coverage, which in the end brings him more votes.
And more attention, yeah.
Other parties that have not gotten coverage in the past years are, for example, the Green Party. The Green Party that emerged in the 90s had once coverage by one of the major channels, I believe USA Today, and then once it got more votes, suddenly the coverage decreased, and reporters from major US media that wanted to cover the Green Party were fired. We have Green Party presidential candidate Jill Stein coming to campus tomorrow at 8 p.m. in the Graduate School of Library Information Science. Karen,
That'll
do you
be
have this?
Wednesday, March 2nd.
March 2nd.
March 2nd.
Right.
501 Daniel Street. That's on the corner of 5th and Daniel, room 126.
Yeah.
And everybody is cordially invited to join the discussion.
Okay, I'm not sure how far we can go in endorsing any particular political candidate, but
No, we're not doing it on behalf of AWARE. Let's make that very
right,
clear.
right.
We can't do that on behalf of AWARE, which is nonpartisan. But Michael and I can as members of the Green Party. Okay, let's clear. You're right to do that, Ron. That's very important. And let me can I say one more thing that needs to be brought out? There is a professor named Rauscher. He's at the Leipzig University in Germany. And he's very he's very anti-Semitic. He says all kinds of awful things about black people, about immigrants. But management of the university has made it very clear that they won't have him removed because he's speaking as a private person. He is not speaking on behalf of the university. So he is not representing the university when he says these things. And also, the students and some of the professors who've been speaking out against him, nonetheless, they're not saying fire him because, he's speaking on behalf of they're saying we don't like what he says, and they counter what he says. And I think that this is a distinction that we really, really have to recognize, that when if somebody comes on the show and they're here as a guest, they have a right to say whatever they want. But if they come on the show as a member of AWARE, and they speak, and they AWARE, which is anti-war, anti-racism, and they make racist statements or they support war, I'm sorry. I'm going to ask them not to return, or I'm going to stand up, I'm going to leave, and you're never going to see me again, because I don't want to be affiliated with somebody who misrepresents the group or the organization. So I think that this is in keeping with the University of Illinois firing Professor Saleta before he even began on the basis that they didn't like what he had to say,
Right.
even though what he was saying was at a private citizen.
yeah.
So look
Yeah.
to Germany, people.
Right, it's amazing that even Germany has this degree of restraint and ethics and so on. And
I'm sure not all.
about firing people who are openly fascist in their opinions. But in the USA, where we supposedly have freedom of speech, and academic freedom and so on, everyone's first thought seems to be when someone
Right.
says something negative about Israel and the mass murder that they carry out, fire him, fire him.
Right,
and
right.
it's really grotesque in my view. But anyway. Time is getting short here. I wanted to mention a couple of final things. We've been hearing more and more about the need for a new triad of nuclear weapons, the missiles, bombers, and submarines. And there's a lot of propaganda now coming at us from various sources, being planted in a number of places, apparently, about our aging weapons, our nuclear weapons, which need to be replaced at the cost of many billions upon billions of dollars. So the constant wail is we have no money for human services, for education, for medical services, and so on. But there's a move now. There's a new B-21 bomber to be built by Northrop Grumman, which will cost about $500 million a copy. And the thing, well, a picture of it has been shown online recently. It looks like something designed for Batman, but anyway, it has a low radar profile, and this is all the thing now about we're going to build these bombers and also ships now with the very sharply angular profiles, and that will make them largely invisible to radar and so on. And so we keep building in this direction. We need an enemy so we can say, look at those horrible people, they're coming to get us, and we have to keep arming. We need a new generation of nuclear submarines, missiles, and long-range heavy bombers to deal with these enemies who are coming to get us, and so on. And
Should we mention that Saturday, AWARE will be having our monthly demonstration downtown.
Right.
Downtown Champaign on the corner of Neal and Church, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You're
Yeah.
welcome to join us. We have signs.
And in response to what you said, I want to quote George Orwell in saying it's not a matter of whether of the enemy or whether the war is real or if it is not, or whether victory is possible. The war is not meant to be won, it is meant to be continuous.
yes,
Hierarchical society is only possible on the basis of poverty and ignorance. This new version is the past, and no different past can ever have existed. In principle, the war effort is always planned to keep society on the brink of starvation. The war is waged by the ruling group against its own subjects, and its object is not the victory over either Eurasia or East Asia, but to keep the very structure of society intact.
yeah, yeah.
I have something to read here.
Sure.
Bill Strutz is a fan of ours, and he said something, he put it in Latin, which I cannot repeat, but the English translation is, to ravage, to slaughter, to usurp under false titles, they call empire. And where they make a desert, they call it peace.
Yeah.
And this is by, I can't say it, Gaius Cornelius Tacitus, AD 98.
Oh, yeah, Tacitus. the
Tacitus.
Roman historian. Yeah.
Roman historian. So, yeah, we've been doing this sort of thing a long time.
Okay, just 1 minute left then. I forgot to say that on my left is Michael Bay from Germany, on my right, Karen Aram, and we've been bringing you AWARE on the Air. It's here weekly, we assume and hope. And
Carl will
I'm-
be back next week.
You're right.
Yeah.
I'm Ron Zook, and we're signing off for AWARE on the Air this time, and we hope you'll rejoin us next week. So good night and good luck.